The top offensive coordinator for a lot of people is headed to Las Vegas, not to Houston. Chip Kelly and the Las Vegas Raiders, a match made in heaven for the Raiders, match made in hell for a lot of Texans fans who wanted the Ohio State offensive coordinator to be the next offensive coordinator of the Houston Texans. What does this mean for the Texans? Were they even interested? Where does that leave Houston? Let's get into all of it here on the show. Welcome to the channel. I'm Cody Stoots. Let's talk some Texans and the breaking news. If you haven't heard, Adam Schefter with the first to report it. Chip Kelly is back in the NFL. He is headed to the Las Vegas Raiders. Chip will be the offensive coordinator for the Las Vegas Raiders. So that means he will not be the offensive coordinator for the Houston Texans. The 61-year-old had been the offensive coordinator for the Ohio State Buckeyes, and they won the national championship this year. There were thoughts that he maybe didn't want to be in the NFL, maybe didn't want to be in Houston. He's back in the NFL as the offensive coordinator of the Raiders. So here's my first thing that I thought of when I saw that he ended up with the Raiders was there's no way the Houston Texans wanted Chip Kelly if he ended up with the Las Vegas Raiders. Because if the Houston Texans wanted Chip Kelly, then he would be the offensive coordinator of the Houston Texans and not the offensive coordinator of the Las Vegas Raiders. There's no way the Texans wanted Chip Kelly and lost to the Las Vegas Raiders. The Texans have more money than the Las Vegas Raiders do. The Texans have a better quarterback situation than the Las Vegas Raiders do. The Texans have a better running back situation than the Las Vegas Raiders do. The Texans have a better wide receiver situation than the Las Vegas Raiders do. The only thing that Las Vegas has that is better than what the Texans have on offense is Brock Bowers is freaking awesome, and their offensive line as a unit is better. That's the only thing that they have that's better than the Houston Texans for what Chip Kelly is going to operate with. So if Chip Kelly selected the Raiders over the Texans, that's a bad job by Chip Kelly. In addition to the shortcomings that the Raiders have as a team, as an organization, they play in the toughest division in all of football with the reigning, defending Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs, an up-and-coming future Hall of Famer coached team in the Denver Broncos, a fantastic up-and-coming future Hall of Fame coach team in the Los Angeles Chargers, and then Pete Carroll and the Raiders. So Chip Kelly ending up with the Raiders, to me, is a big signal that the Houston Texans did not want Chip Kelly to be their offensive coordinator. Because, again, I don't believe in any way, shape, or form the Raiders have more money to offer Chip Kelly, nor do I believe that they have a better situation to offer Chip Kelly. So then the question becomes, well, why would the Texans not want Chip Kelly? Because I know a lot of people preferred Chip Kelly to everybody else. He had tremendous success his couple of first years in Philadelphia with the Eagles. Even his bad years with the Eagles and the 49ers were still somewhat impressive from an offensive standpoint. Obviously, what he put together in college, where he had the impressive time at UCLA, where they got as high as 18th in scoring offense, and then what he did at Ohio State, Chip Kelly had put together a good resume, so why wouldn't the Texans want him? Well, some of the issues that were present from Chip Kelly's time in the NFL, where he didn't always get along with offensive players, perhaps that's an issue that you don't have to worry about, especially if maybe the players on offense just didn't get along with the last guy on his way out the door. So you want to sort of eliminate any sort of element like that. Kelly is a little bit older, set in his ways. Is there evolution to what Chip Kelly is going to do? Plus, some of the up-tempo, faster, speedy stuff that he was doing initially in his NFL stint, it's more prevalent, it's more out there amongst NFL offenses, so defenses are a bit more ready for it. Now, I don't want to take away from what Kelly accomplished his first 2 years in Philadelphia. He was a top 5 offense both years, coming off of being a bottom 4 offense. So Chip Kelly, why didn't the Texans want him? Well, they seemed to prefer somebody else. And perhaps they didn't believe that Chip Kelly was going to be able to translate some of his recent success at the college level back into NFL success. As far as the Raiders go, really good grab by the Raiders. Okay, really good stag by the Raiders. They've got a guy who can coach up a variety of quarterbacks. Chip Kelly's never really coached a star quarterback in his recent years. He can coach up a variety of different quarterback options that they can go, and the Raiders get a nice offensive coordinator. I never believed Chip Kelly was going to leave for the NFL, so I'll have egg on my face for that. I just didn't think if he was leaving for the NFL, he was going to leave for an inferior position. I thought he'd leave for a much better opportunity. Well, I'm assuming Las Vegas opened up the checkbook. They paid a little bit. Maybe he's going to have a heavy hand in the decision-making for the offense this year. And maybe Chip Kelly, at just the age of 61, could be a succession plan for the older Pete Carroll. I don't think that's out of the question either. So Chip Kelly, nice grab for the Raiders. It's a loss if you wanted the Houston Texans to get Chip Kelly. I don't believe Chip Kelly was going to turn down the Texans' job to take the Raiders' job. So I feel like the Texans didn't want Chip Kelly. So then that puts a little pressure on ultimately who they want. And they've interviewed or at least requested to interview 8 different candidates, including the Rams tight ends and pass game coordinator Nick Caley, who's my favorite amongst the candidates that they've talked to. They've had 2 in-house interviews, and Gerard Johnson, the quarterback's coach, and Bill Lazor, the senior offensive assistant. They've talked to Syracuse offensive coordinator Jeff Nixon. They talked to Buccaneers quarterback's coach Thad Lewis. They talked to a assistant coach for the Vikings named Grant Yadinsky, who helps out with their pass game coordinating and their quarterback coaching. Okay. They requested over the weekend an interview with Adam Stenovich, the offensive coordinator for the Green Bay Packers. And he is allowed to interview because the Packers said yes to him getting the opportunity to interview, because Matt LaFleur does not stand in the way of his assistants getting play calling opportunities, because LaFleur himself was able to make a sideways move from OC to OC because of play calling opportunities. So he does not block his assistants if they were going to get the opportunity to call plays. So a variety of different people, none as experienced as Chip Kelly, in the group that the Texans have talked to. In fact, they've leaned much younger than Chip Kelly. You know, Caley's in his 30s. Udinsky's not even 30 right now. Gerard Johnson, right around 30 years old or so, if I'm remembering correctly, or a little bit older than 30. Yeah, 36. You know, Jeff Nixon's 50. Bill Lazor's a little bit older, but they've primarily talked to younger guys. And so I wonder if Chip Kelly's age, and again, older coaches with resumes like Chip Kelly, they're not as flexible as some of the other guys that the Texans have talked to, and maybe the adjustment on the fly, the fine-tuning their offense to maximize what CJ Stroud does. Maybe there was a worry there about Chip Kelly, but ultimately Chip Kelly in the NFL, not with the Houston Texans. So let's talk about it. And your questions, comments, joys, and concerns in the chat. Super chats go to the front of the line. So we start with Zach. Zach says, first Saquon, now Chip. WTF, why do we drag our feet? Now, Zach, I don't feel like the Texans wanted Chip Kelly based on the way that this operated, unless the Raiders just showed up with a whole bunch of extra money that I don't believe that they have. It doesn't feel like the Texans wanted Chip Kelly. There was no big connection to Chip Kelly. There was no big interest or conversation, it felt like, about Chip Kelly. I know the pictures on the internet, the rumors made the rounds that he was at the airport in Houston over the weekend. Ohio State people had stayed fast by the comment that he was out recruiting across the country. He was in high schools this week. So again, I don't think the Texans wanted Chip Kelly. So I don't know they necessarily feel like they lost out on Chip Kelly. The Saquon thing, I believe the Texans had a competitive financial offer, maybe even a more competitive financial offer, and Saquon Barkley picked the Philadelphia Eagles because he gets to play the Giants twice a year. That's what I believe happened with Saquon Barkley. It came out a couple weeks ago that Barkley turned down 2 offers that were higher than the one that he got in Philadelphia. I wonder if the Texans were one of those 2. And again, Barkley, fantastic this year. Not going to have that same year behind the Texans offensive line. Joe Mixon, he maybe set a tone for this team that Saquon Barkley didn't set or wouldn't have set for this team. So it is, you missed out on maybe some of your first choices that we know the Texans were in on Saquon. No clear indication the Texans were ever actually in on Chip Kelly. And perhaps there was a secret, super duper off the radar conversation, explanation, hey, would you be interested? No, maybe, I don't know. Maybe they didn't talk to him and they didn't like what they heard. They didn't like what they saw. Like, they've got to get this right. They can't just settle for, he's got the best resume, so we got to get him. They've got to be forward thinking about maximizing 2025 as well as a multi-year approach. Obviously, if you're really good in 2025, you're looking for a new offensive coordinator in 2026. So, that's a good problem to have. And the Texans have kind of made some interview requests and talked to some guys with maybe the eyes on 2026 in case 2025 goes well. Young Costa with a very funny super chat. We obviously lost Chip Kelly to the Raiders' elite QB and wide receiver room. Yeah, not great over there in Las Vegas for the Raiders when it comes to the quarterback situation and the ability to go find a good quarterback. And then the wide receiver room, Jacoby Myers is their best player at wide receiver. Now, Brock Bowers is the second best pass catcher if you combine the Texans and the Raiders together. Nico Collins would be the first pass catcher selected. Brock Bowers would be the second. But after Brock Bowers, it's very meh. Their offensive line's a little bit better. But again, if Chip Kelly picked because the offensive line's a little bit better and you got Brock Bowers, so be it. Go coordinate that offense. That's not a way to approach it. That's not a way to pick your job if you're Chip Kelly. So super chats will go to the front of the line, talk a little bit more about Chip Kelly, and then go through the names, obviously, that the Texans do still have at their disposal. I know Chip Kelly was at the top of a lot of people's wish lists. I have a hard time believing that the money would have been an issue because the Raiders are not a super flush with cash organization. Famously, a few years ago, they had to trade Khalil Mack because Mark Davis could not afford to set aside the guaranteed portions of Khalil Mack's salary, which is a part of the way you operate when you sign a big contract. The Texans have always had cash to spend. They spent a tremendous amount of money last offseason in free agency. They hello, alarm. They spent a lot of money in free agency last year. They've paid coaches to go away a multitude of times. So I'm not thinking this is a financial thing. I'm thinking this is an interest thing. Chip Kelly not on the Texans' radar, or if he ever was, they ultimately didn't get the vibes or the look or the thought that they wanted from Chip Kelly, and they've decided to continue. Is that "Love Me Sexy" as a ringtone? Yes, it is. Big semi-pro fan here. So H-Town's Ultimate with the super chat. He says, "You the man, Cody." You the man, H-Town's Ultimate. Appreciate you for jumping in. Let's go through the list of the offensive coordinators that the Texans have talked to, or at least requested to talk to, and we'll go through them, talk a little bit about each of them, and figure out exactly where their interest may lie, because one of these guys who ultimately gets hired is going to be viewed as better for the Houston Texans than Chip Kelly was. So let's talk about it. My first guy, the top guy on my list, Nick Caley, the Los Angeles Rams tight ends coach and pass game coordinator. Nick Caley is a guy that previously coached tight ends for the New England Patriots. And in doing that, he also coached under Josh McDaniels and has experience with that offensive system. Left New England, went to LA, was with the Rams for the past 2 seasons. Nick Caley is my top choice for this job. He's been my top choice since the very beginning. I like the background of coaching tight ends because you got to know run game, you got to know run blocking, you got to know pass game, you got to know pass blocking. It's a tough position to coach and coach well. The tight ends, obviously in New England, were very good when Rob Gronkowski was there. I'd love to hear what Gronk has to say about Nick Caley, if he thinks he was useful or not. Obviously, the seasoning with McVay the past couple of years, and the conversation that I hear from the Athletic Football Show, where they say when you walk away with a conversation with Nick Caley, it feels like you walked away from a conversation with Chip or with Sean McVay. And so that's where I kind of like Nick Caley. Obviously, people have concerns about the pass or the experience calling plays. Look, Nick Caley doesn't have experience calling plays. The list of guys that are available that have experience calling plays, it's pretty limited. Okay, the Texans have talked to a handful of guys that have a little experience calling plays, but there's not a tremendous amount of available offensive coordinator minds out there that have called a lot of plays. There really isn't. Okay, like there's not a lot of guys out there that have significant play calling experience, because most of the time those guys end up as head coaches, or other times those guys end up as fired and back to position coaches. So there's not a lot of experience out there for play callers. I understand wanting experience. One of the guys who the Texans talk to that does have experience, Jeff Nixon, the Syracuse offensive coordinator. Nixon previously called plays at Baylor for 3 seasons. The Bears got better each season he was there calling plays. He called plays for a stint as the interim offensive coordinator for the Carolina Panthers. And then this past year, he called plays for the Syracuse Orange, where they were the number 1 passing attack in the country. They were 21st in scoring offense this past year, 126th in rushing offense, though, which I thought was weird because Nixon is a former running back. So Jeff Nixon, he's a guy that's called plays. If you're desiring experience, Jeff Nixon is the guy that they've talked to that has experience and also has a bit of an unknown quantity to him, because Nixon has not ever been officially an offensive coordinator. His job, his players, his input in the NFL up to this point. He's never done that. He did it in an interim stint, but he's got experience calling plays. If you have to have experience, then you're probably a Jeff Nixon guy. Or maybe you're a Bill Lazor guy, which if you're a Bill Lazor guy, that's kind of weird. Bill Lazor's called plays 3 different times in his career. He's gotten fired all 3 times. So all 3 times Bill Lazor's called plays, it hadn't worked out great for Bill Lazor. So he's called plays. He's an experienced guy. He's been around the block. He was also the senior offensive assistant and as I use this affectionately, the old guy at 52. He was the old guy in the room for the offense last year, and it stunk. He couldn't fix it. He didn't have a way to have the input with Bobby Slowick, the advice for Bobby Slowick to fix the offense. So he's a part of the offense not working as much as his experience is a useful part of his resume. If we're putting his experience on his resume, then we're going to need to put his failure as the offensive senior assistant on the resume this year as well. So if you want a lot of experience, Bill Lazor is your guy. It just hasn't been really, really good. Another name that we'll talk about here in just a moment after we get to this super chat. Look Before You Leap just sends the super chat as support. Thank you, Look Before You Leap. Appreciate that. Get to these comments here. Yeah, that's because Bill Lazor never had nobody. Well, I mean, tough. Make the most of your opportunities. Who are the quarterbacks for Bill Lazor? I mean, we can go through it, but they weren't good. The offenses weren't good. Offensive coordinators are about elevating what they have. Okay? Sean McVay took Jared Goff to the Super Bowl. I'm not saying Goff's bad, but Goff's clearly not one of the 5-10 best quarterbacks in the NFL, and he took him to a Super Bowl. Okay? So the really good guys can get their guy to the Super Bowl. Doesn't matter who the guy is. The really good offensive minds can figure it out. So if you want experience, again, I know people want experience. You want experience calling plays? Maybe Brian Johnson is your guy, the Washington Commanders offensive pass game coordinator. Johnson previously called plays in college, as well as previously called plays for the Philadelphia Eagles in 2023. Notice Johnson wasn't the offensive coordinator for the Eagles in 2024. That's because he got fired after his offense was deemed too simplistic and too reliant on screen passes. Anybody watch an offense like that anytime soon? But of course, you don't want to judge a guy by just one failure. You want to judge him by the totality of what he brings to the table. He was a QB coach in Philadelphia for a couple of years. Before that, obviously, he sat under Cliff Kingsbury on Kingsbury's staff here this past year. So that's a positive for him as well. You think about him growing, learning from his mistakes as a big net positive for him, hopefully in his journey to understand what went wrong in 2023. And by the way, the Eagles were still a top 10 total offense and top 10 scoring offense. They just dropped off from where they were at the tippity top of what they had. And I think the players, by the end of the year, just lost faith in Brian Johnson, and that's ultimately what he got shown the door. He got snatched up for a good offense that ended up being really nice this year. So, maybe you like Brian Johnson. Again, he's a guy that's got experience for you. If you desperately desire experience in the position, okay? If you desperately desire experience. Now, if you desire perhaps a better version of what we saw in 2024, something closer to 2023 with maybe hopes that it could be even better, maybe Gerard Johnson is your guy, the Houston Texans quarterback coach. Gerard Johnson got an opportunity actually to interview with or was requested to be interviewed by the Raiders. Ultimately, that job goes to Chip Kelly, which is the reason we're all sitting here talking about Chip Kelly and the offensive coordinator position. So Gerard would, I assume, build on what worked in 2023 and try to take that and put it into 2025. He has an incredible relationship with CJ Stroud. That is the primary element of his candidacy. But just like Bill Lazor, Gerard Johnson has to answer for some of the shortcomings of 2024. And I know he's not in control of the offense, and I know he can't decide what to do with the offense, but CJ Stroud's footwork wasn't as good in 2024 as it was in 2023. CJ Stroud's ability to read defenses weren't as good in 24 as it was in 23. And CJ Stroud's decision-making wasn't as good in 24 as it was in 2023. Gerard Johnson, when he interviewed, if he interviews again, he's got to explain what his role was in those failures for the franchise quarterback. Why didn't CJ Stroud look good in those areas or look as good in those areas in 2024 as he did in 2023? So that's my thing that Gerard Johnson has to answer for, because he's an element of the failure of 2024. He's an element of it. So that's the thing that I would say. Like, the positive for him, good relationship with CJ Stroud. Stroud clearly likes him. Then let's see what he brings to the table, trying to recapture the 2023 success, drop it into 2025. Obviously, that didn't work for a guy like Bobby Slowick, who had a little bit more experience than Gerard Johnson. So it seems a little risky to go that way, but there's certainly something there with the relationship for CJ Stroud. So I'm not going to put Yadinsky or Thad Lewis up just because I don't feel like either of those guys were really, truly interviews that really had the chance to be the offensive coordinator. Thad Lewis has been coaching for about 4 years. Yadinsky's been coaching for just a handful of years, and both would be just wildly weird selections for offensive coordinator. It felt like both of them were kind of getting interviewed to pick their brain, get on the radar for the future, and maybe be on the staff in 2025. So that brings me to the most recent name the Texans have talked to, and that is Adam Stenavich, the Green Bay Packers offensive coordinator. He is allowed to interview for the offensive coordinator job of the Texans. It has been allowed by the Green Bay Packers. Matt LaFleur, the head coach of the Green Bay Packers, does not block his assistants if they're going to be OCs and they're going to go call plays at a different OC position. So I know we did the video the other night. Stenavich is a weird one. Why do you let him out of the building if he's valuable? Matt LaFleur was allowed the ability to interview for a play-calling OC job when he was not a play-calling OC. And he got that job, and then he was a head coach shortly after that. So he does not block his assistants. So Stenavich is allowed to interview with the Texans, despite the position actually being a lateral move from a title perspective. Obviously, he's going to call plays in Houston if he gets the offensive coordinator job. He doesn't call plays in Green Bay. Stenavich is a former offensive line coach for the Packers. My contact in Green Bay that I talked to said that he did a really good job connecting with the veterans when he got there and the old guard that was there and getting the most out of that relationship. And then once he got moved up to offensive coordinator, he did a good job with the Packers, who have not heavily invested in their offensive line, especially the tackle spot, with top selections or lots of money, because they have, I think it's a third and a fifth rounder, or maybe it's a fifth and a seventh rounder. I don't know exactly what it was, but their tackles are not super highly invested in guys. Of course, he was the former offensive line coach and then the offensive coordinator. So the O-line has come a long way while he's been in the building there in Green Bay. He also helped develop some of the run game concepts that the Packers do really well. He's been given a lot of credit for that. Comes off as a little bit more of a scientist than an enthusiasm guy, is what my Green Bay guy told me. So maybe a little bit more low-key, but offensive line background, excellent offensive line play when he was there as the O-line coach as well as the offensive coordinator. And he'd come in, try to establish the run, get the offensive line on track. Maybe he needs a high-level pass game coordinator with him to help with the passing attack side of it. But Adam Stenavich, not an experienced guy from a play-calling standpoint, but got some experience. Worth noting, he and D'Amico Ryans would have crossed paths 2 different times. Once in Houston when Stenavich was an offensive lineman for the Texans. The second time when Stenavich was the assistant offensive line coach for the San Francisco 49ers when D'Amico Ryans was coaching in San Francisco. So those are where we stand after Chip Kelly gets the Las Vegas Raiders job. Those are the options. I did not put up Yadinsky or Thad Lewis. I don't feel like either one of those would be a smart move. Patrick Ding asked an interesting question. Was Bobby a scientist or an enthusiasm guy? You'd lean more towards scientist, more towards a low-key guy with Bobby Slowick. Frank Ross is kind of what I think about with like a get in there, like fire up, rah type thing. That's not how I got from Bobby Slowick. And that's not really what my Green Bay people get from Stenavich. But, hey, you don't have to be a rah energy guy if you just coach him up. So, Pinball Mafia Dennis, he says, I like Stenavich, and I like the guy from Washington as well. That's Brian Johnson. Quentin, he likes Brian Johnson. He likes Jeff Nixon. And he likes Nick Caley as well. Panda brings up the big positive there for Stenavich. If he calls a good offense, gets the O-line together, you're well on your way to getting some things going as an offense. This offensive line has got to be better for the Houston Texans in 2025, not only from an overall talent perspective, and that's on D'Amico Ryans and Nick Caserio to get the guys in there, but from a coaching perspective as well. That's going to be on the offensive coordinator and ultimately whoever the assistant offensive line and offensive line coach are for this team. They've got to take the guys that are holdovers from this poor offensive line in 2024 and make them better players in 2025. They've got to make them better players in 2025. You cannot do a full hockey change and get 5 new offensive linemen in here. You're going to have one of Titus Howard and Shaq Mason on this team. You're going to have Laramie Tunsil on this team. Juice Scruggs and Jarrett Patterson are still going to be here. Blake Fisher is still going to be here. You're going to have to improve some of those guys, and that's where maybe guys with some offensive line experience like Stenovich or some long-term coaching experience like a Jeff Nixon, like a Brian Johnson, who coached in Philadelphia with one of the best offensive lines in all of football. Maybe those guys have a little bit more lean that way and a little bit more intrigue that way. Worth noting, Nick Caley, the Rams, they've been able to sort of patch it together on the offensive line for a long time for the past few seasons. And I believe that Zach Cromer, who interviewed with the Jaguars over the weekend for their vacant offensive line coach spot, I believe that Zach Cromer, the assistant offensive line coach for the LA Rams, could be in play as the offensive line coach for the Texans if they hire Nick Caley. So that's a candidacy bonus for Caley, is you get a good offensive line coach in here. And with that, Cromer's been there 8 years with the Rams, assistant O-line coach. So a lot to like about Cromer, and then perhaps being in there with Nick Caley as the offensive coordinator. Rick floats a co-OC's idea. Too many cooks in the kitchen that way. Too many cooks in the kitchen, too many ingredients on the dish, too many dishes on the menu if you do that. I want one guy, I want one voice, I want a top guy in the building as the offensive mind, and I want him to really run things and put together a really good staff. So no co-OCs or, secondary mind or stuff like that. And that's kind of where, if you're going to bring in a new guy, I don't know that you should put any requisites that he has to keep a Bill Lazor or a Ben McDaniels or a Gerard Johnson or any of these other, or Cole Popovich, the assistant offensive line coach the Texans had this year. If you bring in a new guy, he should be allowed to hire his whole entire own staff if indeed that is what he wants to do. So that's, I think, an important element of hiring somebody, is making sure they're allowed to hire their own guys. So to wrap all this up here and put a bow on it, bring it back to the beginning, Chip Kelly is headed to the Las Vegas Raiders. I didn't believe he was going to head to the NFL. Ultimately, he ended up in the NFL at the Raiders to be under new coach Pete Carroll. And I'm reading Adam Schefter's story here as I look through it. And there's no mention. There's no mention of the Houston Texans here in Adam Schefter's story on the online. So again, I feel like Chip Kelly ending up in Vegas is because the Houston Texans were not interested in Chip Kelly, because Chip Kelly would not pick an organization that's in the toughest division in football, without a quarterback, with bad wide receiver talent, with bad running back talent, over a team that's in one of the worst divisions in football, that has a quarterback, that has a running back, that has a wide receiver, and has the ability to improve one of their biggest weaknesses on offense, which is the offensive line. So I don't believe Chip Kelly, if given the option, would have chosen the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, maybe he's a gambling man and he likes Las Vegas. He's gambling on his career with the crappy situation they have there in Vegas with the quarterback spot. But the Texans situation would have been less of a gamble. The fact that he's not the Texans offensive coordinator, to me, feels like the Texans did not end up being interested in Chip Kelly being their offensive coordinator. EM says maybe they offered him $3 million. It's widely reported Chip Kelly was making $2 million at Ohio State And for him to make the jump, he probably got a pay raise. The Raiders don't have a lot of cash lying around, so if they made a big financial investment, good for them. And I don't think that money would have been the issue. The Houston Texans have more money than the Las Vegas Raiders, my understanding of the situations. And the Texans have never been afraid to write a check. They spent $1 gazillion in free agency. That's cash money that they have to spend when they sign some of those big contracts. They've made coaches, they've paid coaches and general managers to go away before. So they've never had an issue writing the check. So I can't believe that it would have been money would have been the issue. And as Wes says, look, the search continues. Indeed. Patrick says, maybe they gave him a big pile of pennies for the slots. They still have some coin slots in Vegas. The El Cortez, I believe, still has some coin slots, as well as a few other of the off-strip and smaller casinos around Las Vegas. But the Texans process continues. Perhaps second interviews for candidates that they've already talked to. I wouldn't put it past them adding a ninth or maybe even a 10th name to the equation. But a lot of those interviews last week, they did interviews on, I feel like, every day except for Wednesday, or requested an interview for every day except for Wednesday. A lot of those interviews were virtual. Some of those guys getting in person, getting in the building, draw it up on the whiteboard, show me your PowerPoint, all that kind of stuff. That could be something as well that pops up this week. So the search rolls on for yet another few days as the Texans look for an offensive coordinator. It will not be Chip Kelly as the offensive coordinator for the Houston Texans. He is headed to the Las Vegas Raiders. Look before you leap with a super chat. He says, we're going to ball in 2025, y'all. Kaylee is coming. So look before you leap in the Nick Kaylee camp, throwing his support behind him. Sean G says, I'm curious if there is someone you'd like to see them interview, but they haven't yet. Yes. Dave Ragone, who is the quarterbacks coach for the LA Rams. Ragone has coached under Sean McVay 2 different times. McVay talks at length about how Ragone is a really high-level guy and a good coach. Ragone also coached under John Fox, Matt Nagy, and Arthur Smith. So he's coached under a bunch of different coaches. He's never called plays, but he's been a part of offensive meetings with Matt Nagy's offense, which is an Andy Reid offshoot, Arthur Smith's offense, which is one of the teach tapes for the zone offense, and then, of course, what Sean McVay brings to the table. So Dave Ragone, former Texans quarterback, is a guy that I would like to see them interview if the new names continue to pop up from an interview perspective. So there we are. Chip Kelly to the Raiders, not to the Texans. Feels like the Texans weren't interested in old Chipper. So that's where we are right now. That'll end the live stream. Just a little jump in here, talk about Chip Kelly, why we think he didn't take it, why he might have not taken it, so on and so forth. And we end the live streams the same way each and every time. Gustavo. Super chat here at the end. Nick Kaylee to Houston. Sources, Gustavo Cardenas. Gustavo, I hope you're right. I hope that is indeed the case for the Texans. I believe in Nick Kaylee, and I believe he can get this thing going for the Texans. So that is where I am from that standpoint. Appreciate you for the super chat. All right, let's end this one here. This is my hope for you. This is my charge for you as well. We end the live stream the same way each and every time. I want you to eat good. I want you to sleep good. I want you to be good. We'll talk Texans again soon. Thanks for watching, everybody.